Welcome, everybody. Hello. So we're going to talk about a lot of stuff today. It's all GraphQL focused. For those of you who don't know what GraphQL is, we're going to talk about that. You're all going to be up to speed by the time we get into how making your life easier as an AppSec consultant, or just someone who likes to hack GraphQL. So this is me. This is some stuff I've done. I'm OSWE certified. I've been professionally in security for 5 years, and like all of us, doing it for a lot longer than that. And before that, before I got into it professionally, I did about 16 years of software development. So that's my background. That's how I got into AppSec, specifically. Okay. So just so I know who I'm talking to, who has heard of GraphQL? Most people. Who uses Burp Suite? It's about the same people, actually. Okay. Has anybody actually tried to pen test GraphQL?
Horribly.
Was it horribly?
Yeah.
You're going to love this stuff. Okay. Who's pen tested GraphQL with Burp? Has anybody tried that? Yeah, it sucks. It did suck. Okay, here we go. Ready? This is what's going to go on. We're going to do the intro. I already did that. I'm going to explain to you what GraphQL is. Then we'll get into how to break it. Then we'll talk about what tools are currently available and what's out there, what Burp currently does, and we'll talk about how I fix that. And then I'll show you how it works, and you can download it and ask me questions at the end. Okay. So, what even is GraphQL? GraphQL, they call it a query language for your API. So let's go straight from the basics. If you are in this talk, you probably know what a REST API is. That's like when you make a request with a put or a post or a get or a delete method to some path. And then in the body of your HTTP request, you'll have some request data, some input, right? It'll be in post format or it'll be in JSON format. Whatever it is, the body is what's important here for GraphQL. So GraphQL is a specific format in the body of the request. And if you take a look here, the top one in the request, do I need to make it bigger? You guys can see? It's a pretty small room, right? So you see it almost looks like JSON, almost. But the properties don't have double quotation marks. Not everything, there's no colon after the properties. Not all properties have values. So it is its own kind of format. But just to demystify GraphQL, that's when you're making the request from the front end, that's all it is. It replaces a REST API, and I'll talk a bit about how that happens, but it's just a different body format. And instead of sending it to a particular REST API endpoint, like /user/data or something, right? You just send it to /GraphQL. All GraphQL requests go to this /GraphQL endpoint. And this is why people are adopting it, is because everything exists in that query. So you don't need a specific REST API for your users. Sorry, you don't need a specific endpoint for your users. You don't need a specific API for your hero. You can have one API endpoint, and you send the query to it, and it will tell the backend what it's looking for. That's why they say it's like a query language. It's like SQL sort of, but for your backend instead of for a database. Then on the server side, it's not magic. There's some stuff you put in some libraries and stuff that understands how to parse this out. And then you have, just like you would in a REST API, you have these, they call them resolver functions, which is where you get the request with all the parsed data, and then the library will parse for you like, it's looking for this kind of thing, and it has this kind of input. And then you can just reply back, hello, or you can you can, in your backend, go, oh, they're looking for heroes, and they're looking for the name and the height. So I'm going to go do a SQL query or whatever, pull that data back, and then send back the response in JSON. The response is in JSON. So this is why people use it. It reduces your API calls to basically just, the other thing is you can do a lot of nesting. So you can make a bunch of what would be 5 REST API calls, now is just 1. And you can have just one endpoint. You don't have to, every time you want to add a new functionality, you don't have to create a new endpoint, make sure all your authentication, authorization is working on it, all that kind of stuff. Here you've got some middleware that manages authentication authorization, and then it passes on the request to the parser, the query language parser, and then you might do some further authorization there, like maybe I'm not allowed to see heroes, maybe I'm only allowed to see losers or something like that. So okay, so so let's talk about it's vulnerable, right? It's basically a REST API with a different body form. So the magic that the library does is kind of opaque to us. It doesn't matter because it has the same vulnerabilities as what a REST API. It still takes input, and it's still vulnerable to a developer forgetting to check to validate and make sure that you shouldn't have such and such character in the input. Do you mind close this door? It also comes with some bonus denial of service vulnerabilities, which is nice. The tool that I built doesn't really get into those, but they're just denial of service. And there's actually other burp plugins that will do that for you. But just quickly, you remember I was saying you can nest. So I could say like hero, and then underneath hero, maybe every hero has a friend. So I might do friend underneath that, and then I have to ask for the name and height of the friend. And then that friend will have a friend, and that friend will have a friend. And you can infinitely nest these queries. And if you nest them like 300 deep or 3,000 deep, the parser will spend a lot of time working on that. So that's one form of denial of service. They call that deep nesting. Nowadays, the thing is that it's not as interesting because a lot of libraries, the default is 5 nests deep. Like, you have to misconfigure it to allow a lot more than that for that to be an issue. There's also cyclical references, which are harder to catch, and also can be a vulnerability for denial of service, but not as interesting, right? We're not trying to tie up the server, at least I'm not. I'm trying to get the hero's, debit card or whatever. So the other nice thing is that it self-documents. It's really cool. So there's this special query that you can make. This one here, we're querying for the hero and we're asking for the name and the height. But there's also this special query called an introspection query, where you ask for everything that's available on the website, everything that the API offers, and it. I think my next slide might actually do this. But anyways, it pulls in everything, and you can. It's useful. Like it's intentionally there. Let me go to the next slides. I feel like this will be. I don't want to jump around. Okay. So I will talk about this more. But anyways, so in your backend, you kind of like define a schema, which is again why they call it query language. So I don't want to get into the nuts and bolts of the server. Just trust me, if you looked up the documentation, it wouldn't sound so mystical. You build a schema, which is like you say, you have your models and you map to database, whatever. Anyways, not important. The important thing is that that exists on the server, and we want to know about it. And you can make this special schema request, and it just sends you everything. It's great. Now, is that a vulnerability? That's a question to be asked. Some people have turned it off, but it's useful because the front end, the whole point of GraphQL is to allow your front end to make any kind of request it wants. It makes development a lot easier, right? Makes development a lot easier. Introspection, yeah. Some people will turn it off. If that's the case, if you're developing, so if you're I'm assuming you're white hat and you're working on this because you've been asked to. If the introspection is turned off, which it might be for the reasons I explained, there's also, you can just download the schema file and put it into the API, into the plugin. It'll do the exact same thing. What'll it do? I'll get into that later. Hacks it. We'll get into that. Okay, this goes into further detail. So how does it work? In your application code, you import the GraphQL library. We talked about that. There's a bunch of them. There's Apollo is a really popular one. I don't make money from Apollo, just it's the only one I can remember right now. But anyways, then you define your schema, you define the resolvers. The resolvers, again, those are the functions that, like, when you get the request, you see what the request is made of, and that's where your code goes. And you say, oh, they've requested these things. This is how I'm going to fetch that data, and this is how I'm going to return it. And then there's also 3 request types that you need to know about in GraphQL. There's the query, that's like your GET request. There's the mutation. By the way, these all happen through POST requests because we're not using REST APIs, we're using GraphQL. So you have to actually define and say this is a query, which is where you get data. You can also do a mutation. Excuse me, just had lunch. You can also do a mutation where it's like a POST request, where you actually you submit data and it changes something in the backend. And then there's the subscription. Won't get too much into this, but this is sort of like you can subscribe to like a WebSocket type of thing. But still hackable, but it's just not as interesting. because it's kind of the same. So yeah, this is Sigmund Freud. He's the master of introspection. Right? So what is it? It's a special query. Wow, I really got ahead of myself here. It fetches the entire query. Sorry, it fetches the entire schema. Is it a vulnerability? That's pretty easy to decide. I think it's useful. I can understand why people might think it's a vulnerability because it allows a hacker to see everything that's there. But if you're properly authenticating and properly authorizing your request, then it shouldn't matter what they can see, right? It's security by obscurity if you turn it off, in my opinion. But here's the thing, right? We want to use Burp. I like using Burp. Burp has this great tool called the Active Scanner. And for those of you who don't know, the Active Scanner, it's only available in the Pro, Burp Suite Pro. So you give it a URL, or you go in the proxy and click around, and it'll start swallowing up all those URLs. And it will find all the insertion points. It'll find injection points where input might go, where the backend might do something with that data. And it'll start fuzzing. It'll start adding payloads, right? It'll add cross-site scripting and SQL injection and all this kind of stuff. It's also, it doesn't just send them. It's also this kind of cool, smart tool where it actually can look at the response and go, oh, this looks successful. And if it's, for instance, something it'll do for SQL injection is it'll send like a single quote. Yeah, one single quote. I was going to say a single quote. And it'll see in the response it gets some SQL error. And it won't just go, oh yeah, we found SQL injection. Now it's smart enough to go, let's make a second request and do 2 single quotes. And if the error disappears, we probably have a SQL injection. And then it'll try even further, right? So the Active Scanner is wicked. It saves us a ton of time. And Burp loves REST APIs. It knows how to speak the language of REST APIs, right? It eats that shit for breakfast. But the thing is, it doesn't understand GraphQL. When you try to give it a GraphQL, you'll see, I'll show you later why that's the case, but it really, actually, you know what, I think it might be too, oh no, I'm great, I did this properly, let me see. Yeah, okay, man. I did a good job updating these slides. Okay, so let's talk about safe injection sites. These are places where you want to put your payloads. So in the previous example, where were we supposed to put it? They were just properties, right? Yeah, you could try fuzzing the properties, but you're just going to get GraphQL errors. By the way, side little not vulnerability, but similar to introspection. If you mistype, instead of human, if I do huma or something like that, the response will go, did you mean human? So that you can fuzz that way and find properties if introspection is turned off. But anyhow, as you see now, we now have input, right? Human, and we want humans, but we only want the one with the ID of 1000. So that's our input. We also have the second input, the units of foot. The thing is that foot is an enum. As you can probably tell, it's a constant, right? It's all capitalized. It maps to probably to some integer in the back. So it's not going to be great for fuzzing. The string, on the other hand, great for fuzzing. That's because this is probably going to some dynamically typed language or something like that, and we get to play around with all sorts of things. So we can do things like take our old payloads and put them in a new location. So this is where you put your payload now. You put it in where the 1000 is. Okay, like we could end the talk here because this is now how you break GraphQL. The thing is that this is what a GraphQL query looks like. So I've been showing you the beautified version of it, but when you actually send it, this is, imagine on the bottom, this actual request, this is all one line. This is why I've got that one there to make it clear, it's not too long. So, can I put my mouse there? Yeah. So you look, there's all this like white space stuff, new lines, new tabs, and it's all in one line. First, so it is a JSON object, and we have the query, and the query is of type query, and then inside we have all this. So it's dirty looking, but if you can imagine, because this is a JSON object, Burp looks at this and goes, oh yeah, I see a property, I see a value. So Burp is like, yeah, I got this. We're just going to inject it like this, right? You put it at the end of the value, right? That's where my injection point goes. If I want to test for SQL injection, I'm going to put some string, and then at the end of that string, at the end of the value, I'm going to put my single tick and then my test. But Burp, this is not how GraphQL works. So what we wanted to do is get it to work. So I feel like I'm moving kind of fast here. So this is what I wanted to do. I wanted to make a burp extension because I love the active scanner. It does all that stuff for me. I wanted to use introspection to pull down the schema, take that schema, and then write some code to turn that into every single possible request we can make, and then send that to the active scanner with the correct insertion points. So there are plugins that will do the introspection query, and there's one called NQL, which is wicked. I'm actually using a bit of their code to do this, borrowing. Sorry. It's okay, it's Apache license. So what we do is we take the introspection and we convert it into all the possible requests. That's what NQL does, right? But they don't then find insertion points. There's another plugin called GraphQL Radar, which will, on a single request, show you the insertion points. But it doesn't do introspection. It doesn't convert it back into the possible requests. And you can only send one request at a time to the active scanner. I want a one-click solution, please. It seems obvious in my brain. How has this not happened already? I point burp at a URL. I hit go. I might need to add. There's a space to add custom headers if you need, like authorization headers. But if not, URL, hit go, boom, downloads everything, sends it to the active scanner, and you go get coffee and come back and write your report. This is what the result ends up looking like. This is not the plugin. This is the result of the active scanner. Where's my cursor? There it is. Okay. Nope, I saw it for a second. For those of you following along at home, I'm like parallel to the screen. Okay. So this here is showing that we've got an active audit going on, extension driven. This is an extension that I built. So it's currently doing a scan, and on the right side we see all the issues that it's found. Whoopsies. And on the bottom we see that it has successfully injected into the right place. Hold for applause. Hold for applause. Okay. So let me introduce to you AutoGQL. Give it a URL, option to customize headers, click go. Okay? It's going to run the introspection query. This is in the background. It's going to run the introspection query. It's going to determine every possible request. It's going to find all the little spaces where we should be injecting shit. And then it's going to take that and send it all to the active scanner. It will actually, before it sends it, it'll give you the option to deselect some stuff. I'll get into that in a second. So I'm going to show you how that works. Let me pull up. Bring the cursor back onto this screen. Starting verb. Okay. So let me pull this over. Okay, now this is going to be a bit of a task here to do this one. So I'm running this right now. I've got this application called the Dan Vulnerable. Has anybody heard of the Dan Vulnerable web application? It's this thing on GraphQL. I'm sorry, it's this thing on GitHub. It's a vulnerable application that you can use to test your tools, or just if you want to play around. It's kind of like that. This is someone made a GraphQL version of it, so that's what I'm using to test. Here's my plugin, AutoGQL. So we'll go over to this tab. We're going to put in the URL for that tool. For that, oh, let me show you what that looks like before I even do this. I have a web page open. Yes. Oh my goodness. I just want to give you guys all the context in the world so it's as easy to understand as possible. Okay. Dan Vulnerable GraphQL application. So you see it's kind of like a paste bin. They made like a fake paste bin website, and it's all just uses GraphQL. So you can have private paste, public paste, create them, import them, upload them, all sorts of cool stuff. And behind here, in the back end, it's vulnerable to injection attacks. That's sort of the point. So I'm going to put in the URL for that, which is host. It's on port 5013, and usually the endpoint is /GraphQL. It isn't always. You can look it up for most websites, or just browse a website and look in the network inspector and see what endpoint it's using. But normally it's /GraphQL. So I would add any custom headers here, authorization headers if I need it. I don't, so I'm going to hit fetch scan, and it'll take about 2 or 3 seconds. Okay, so now we have every single possible request that we can make to this site. It shows all the different query types. Oh, let me expand it. Yeah, one thing I got to do is work on the UI to size everything properly. But so we've got these checkboxes to know which ones we want to send to the active scanner. Some of them are deselected. That's because the deselected ones have no insertion point. They don't take any input, so they're not interesting to us. We might want to send them to GraphQL. So sorry, we might want to send it to Burp Active Scanner because it'll still test the header values and things like that, but it's going to do those on the other ones as well. So, you know, save yourself the time. The more of these you select, the longer your active scan is going to run for. So it's pre-selected those that have inputs. On the far right column, you can see how many insertion points there are. And if I pick one here, let's see, can somebody read that out to me? I can't actually see what this is.
Read and burn.
Read and burn? So read and burn, if you look, wherever it says code star, that's our insertion point. That means it found an insertion point. Another thing I want to add to this is just like actual visual highlighting, but
that one is unchecked.
That one's, oh, sorry. Thank you very much. This one, what's this one?
System diagnosis.
Oh, this is a beauty. This one was the source of a lot of good stuff. Look at the, I don't know if you guys can see, but look at the parameter name. What's the parameter name? CMD, right? Yeah, this one was a beauty. So, okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit run scan, and another thing I need to do is add like an indication that it started working. But it started working, and if I head over to the dashboard, oh my God, I lost the cursor.
Logger plus.
Yeah, we can go Logger plus plus and see it happen too. But here we can just see here. So this wasn't here before, this last one. All the results on the right side, these were found before. It does usually take about, for this small application, it took about a half hour to find all this stuff. OS command injection, SQL injection, cross-site scripting. I mean, this is an intentionally vulnerable app. You're not always going to find stuff like this, right? But depending on the size of the application, I would just let it run until it exhausts its payloads. On a really big app, that can take a day sometimes, running it overnight. On a small application, it took only half an hour. And, well, to be fair, I'm also running it on localhost, so a little faster than normal. But that being said, it's also running in Docker, so, and this is a 2015 MacBook, so maybe even slower than the network. But if we go to audit items, what this is going to show us, so now we're looking, by the way, this is the user interface for the active scan. Okay, so we're looking at, when you start an active scan, you get this box. That's what it means. That's what, so this area extension-driven, let's say active audit. The active audit is the active scan. That's the tool that we look for that does all the automatic payload and checking, response checking, and all that. So as you can see, it's making thousands of requests already. We just started it. The audit items are all the items that we've sent to it. So these are the individual requests that we sent to it. It's going to take each of those and go to the injection point and start hammering it and looking at the responses and making sure that, checking whether or not there's a vulnerability there. I think we can actually look at, yeah, here we can actually see the request that it's making. I'll pick a random one here. I'll sit out in front. I'm still on camera here, so I can. Okay, so here it has injected search, keyword, a bunch of weird stuff. Yeah, I think you're right. It's serialization. It's running the search query, and the keyword it's used is, it's used one of these randomized tokens that Burp uses so that it can find it in the response. And then, yeah, it's using object class, which is, yeah, for testing for deserialization, creating objects in the backend. So this is it at work. That was, I mean, for the most part, that's the demo. We just now let this run, and then what ends up happening is you, while it's going or when it's done, you can look over here and see all the results. So an exclamation mark, a red exclamation mark means it found something of high criticality, and it's certain of it. Burp will tell you if it's certain or if it's undetermined, or a firm, which is less than certain. That's because it runs extra tests. Once it finds something, it'll run extra tests and verify whether or not it really is the problem. I think it thinks it is. And in this case, the problems were OS command injection. This one is something about going over the network, if I recall correctly. It's unidentified code injection. That's actually a new one. But anyway, so if I click on one of these, let's click on OS command injection, because is that what this is? I can't see.
Yep.
Okay. So it gives you purpose grid. It gives you a little example as to why this is, a little description as to why this is a problem. We can look at the request that it sent, and highlighted in red is the payload. And then in the response, is it an echo? What is it? It's an NS lookup. Okay. So that means that it sends an NS lookup, and then Burp Pro has this other feature called a collaborator, where it's kind of like spins up, I don't know if you've heard of canary tokens. It kind of spins up like a server at a particular IP address, and then sends an NS lookup as a payload with the IP address to this machine. And if this machine gets pinged, then there's a high chance that that it's found something. So that's how it checked it here. There's other cases where it uses echo, and then it just sees the response and the response. It's all, yeah, this would be an SSRF, and but it's an RCE, so at that point it's whatever you want. So the response here, this I think is the content. Like the collaborator hosts like a little HTML web server, so I think it returns the content of it. And then the collaborator evidence says like, yeah, this collaborator it has been pummed, and then it follows up with some extra evidence. But anyways, that's the tool in action. It's running in the background as we speak. That's all there is to it. As you saw, I just put in the URL, fetched it, picked the ones I wanted, ran the scan. And again, you may want to add like authorization, bearer token headers or whatever, maybe a real browser user agent if you need that. But that's it. It works. Okay, let's get back to the. I'm going to get a little bit more in depth about it. So we talked about this. Oh yeah, okay. So again, enter the URL, headers, fetch query. It does these three things: runs the introspection query, builds a request, marks insertion points. I learned animation on PowerPoint on the plane on the way here, and it has the request listed on the left. You can view an example on the bottom, and then you hit the golden button, click Run Scan, and Bob's your uncle. Then we get to duplicate that slide. So here were our goals again. I wanted to make a Burp extension. I wanted to find every possible request. I wanted to leverage ActiveScan. And I successfully did all those things. And it's available on my GitHub. And actually, this link will still work, but I moved it to our company's GitHub, which is just FWDsec. Don't worry about it. This link will still work. So this is my summation before the Q&A. Let me do a little peek. See? So just before that, it's GraphQL. It has the same vulnerability as REST APIs. It's going to be lack of input validation, just like you have in every application, right? So it's not magic. This thing isn't magic. It just makes it so that Burp can scan it. It can the same way it automates REST API scanning, where you can just click around and then walk away. Didn't know how to do that with GraphQL, and you had to click around, unless you had like a Swagger definition file or an OpenAPI file. So this is sort of akin to that, where you sort of download the Swagger file equivalent, which is introspection, and then just tell it to go to town. So it'll automate your vulnerability hunting. It does the insertion points, yada yada, some of the stuff already, and go get it there. And it'll save you lots of time. So ask me questions now.
Can you throttle the requests?
Yeah, so you can definitely throttle the requests. That's a Burp config. So I can go into Burp and go into the ActiveScan and do the configuration of that. Yeah.
What about if GraphQL queries are related to each other, for example?
Thank you. That's a great question. I think I know. If I don't answer your question, then tell me.
Sequence should be.
Yes. Sequences. So let's go back to the query. Damn cursor. How far am I in the? There we are. Okay. So this is another reason.
Let's give me an example. The audience might not. Now, let us say we have like a weblog. Without creating a post, we cannot just delete posts.
Yeah, let me give you an example.
Sequence is important.
What if we have a paste bin?
Yeah.
And we want to make sure that we create a paste before we delete a paste. It doesn't make sense to delete paste if it doesn't exist. We can't test that endpoint. How about if I want to test whether or not I can access somebody else's paste? Well, we can't do that if there are no pastes in there, or there's only one user. So this is another reason why it's useful to have the checkboxes. So it's not just for, it'll automatically select the ones that have insertion points that have insertion points. But for instance, one of these, I can't see it, but I know that one of them is like delete all pastes, right? I would probably deselect that on my first run. I would maybe just select all the creation ones on my first run, hit go. Once it's done, then I might select the other ones and do it sequentially that way. To make it smart enough to know that delete should come second, I could do it with some word matching. I could be like, look for delete, remove, clear, or something like that. Do those last, but it's not going to work in all cases.
You can trace the objects and see, for example, which one creates an object of
Yeah.
the user
Yeah.
or post, and then we can see who consumes post, and then we can reorder and infer the relationship.
If the response we get gives us enough information, we could. But I think at this point, it would need a human eye to be able to do that. Yeah. But actually, in my, wait till you see the README on my GitHub. You guys are gonna love it. I even go into some recommendations about that, and I say like, remove the delete ones first. Yeah. Any other questions? I think you. Yes.
Would this extension handle like data exposure as well?
Direct exposure.
Yeah, data exposure, information exposure.
Yeah. So the question is, will the repeating for the people at home? So the question is, will it be able to find like information disclosure vulnerabilities? So the burp active scanner does all that kind of stuff. It will add payloads and it'll look at the results, and it'll even send. I think it even will just send regular requests to begin with, and look to see like, oh, does this response have a password field? Does it have a server header? All that stuff is actually built into the active scanner. And all that will happen automatically. What's that?
To find IDOR, we can use authorize, like you mean IDOR and access control issues.
Yeah.
Is that the question? So for access control issues, yeah, that's a good question. I don't know that there's specifically a payload for that in active scan. What I would do is what this guy is saying. I would use authorize, which is another plugin. What's cool is that it doesn't rely on needing to find injection points, insertion points. The way it works, it's a whole separate plugin that I'm not responsible for, but I'll just give you sort of a rundown, which is you log into the site, you get the headers that you need or the cookies that you need, and you stick those into authorize, and then you log out, or you log in as a different user with different privileges, and you turn authorize on, and you start browsing around the site. And authorize will browse the site at the same time as you using the other cookie. So that way you get like, and it'll do like unauthenticated, your cookie, and then the lower privilege account that you're now clicking through it. And it'll tell you like if it was able to access things through all three, or just two of them, or just one of them. So that's how I would check for access control using burps.
So what do you call the extension again?
Authorize. It's like authorize, but without the H.
There are two, auto repeater and others.
Oh.
Yeah.
It replaces for example, you put the token of like normal user, and also you put the admin token, and then you would start to like serve all the admin functionalities, and then it replaces the
cookie
admin token with the regular user token, and then it will find any issue.
Yeah, it'll highlight them in red if the lower privilege user can get to 200 from using cookie. Yeah.
Again, back to where you started from, so about exposing your
introspective,
the introspective console,
yeah.
I was having a back and forth with my developers last week about it.
Yeah.
So what is the ideal situation about that?
Okay, so ideally, the ideal situation for turning on or off introspection. My opinion, if it's not a standard, but my opinion is that you should leave it on, and that you should do your authorization properly on the back end. Because by hiding it, it's just security through obscurity, right? You're just saying it's less hackable because people can't find the documentation for it, essentially, right? But then all it takes is for one person who has admin privileges to click around and, I don't know, write a little blog post about it and talk about all the different functions they were able to use, and then that gets out in the open, and then what? Like, you may as well just turn it on. Yeah, I mean, I would hide admin functions. Sorry, I understand what I mean is I understand I understand the desire to hide admin functionality, but if your authorization checks are in properly, it doesn't matter. It shouldn't matter. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I personally, I would leave it on. There may be some rare circumstances where it would be a vulnerability to expose within schema, but then my other opinion about that is then you've done your schema wrong. You know? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
One last
Yeah, please. You're the only one asking questions, so ask as many as you want. You're my #1 fan right now.
So, yeah, so the authorization and authentication,
Mhm.
setting is done properly, there's no problem, and leaving it on.
Yeah.
So is there a way, because I was trying to crack that, is there a way to bypass that?
Authorization?
Yeah.
It's really dependent on the application. And what I mean is, let me be really clear about what I mean. So I'm going to go back to this slide here. Let's go to this one. No, I want the one that had input. Is it not changing? Oh, I'm right. I'll flip it over in a second. Okay. Back. So let me give an example. So here, we're asking for the human of ID 1000. Now, maybe only people within the group 1000 to 2000 are allowed to view this user. So in the back end, I need to be doing that test. Okay, they've requested ID 1000. I'm going to look at your token, your session token, and I'm going to use that to determine whether or not you have privileged access. Right? And whether or not you can break that is completely dependent upon the developers who made it. Some of them will make mistakes. Some of them will basically some of them will make mistakes. They'll either do it, they'll do it improperly using the knowledge that they know, or they've gleaned some bad knowledge somewhere and they do it badly. So that is, there's no like special way to break authorization. That's kind of our job, is to, in a way, is to find the problems that the developers leave behind. So there's no unfortunately, there's no golden ticket to do it. There's no like one key for all holes. Does that answer your question? I feel like
Yeah, it does.
Yeah. So I would leave introspection turned on personally, and then just make sure that you've got really good authorization checks in here, and you're using a strong session token. Any other questions? I know that coming in here, a lot of you didn't even know what GraphQL was. So I know some of you are like, oh, I'll just look this up later. But you got me here right now. Ask your question. Does this, any other questions? Also, you can ask me questions afterwards. Yeah.
Okay.
#1 fan.
So I will try and go and try the extension.
Yeah.
Just show me. So, but I was having this issue. So after I did my active scanning,
Yeah.
So I was trying to send my request to repeater and to modify that to get a response.
Yeah.
But it's always telling me you have to be like an authenticated user to access that. So I know it's kind of a scary setting.
Yeah.
So I don't know if it's specific to me or something.
It sounds probably like it is specific to that application. It's probably application specific. So they have somewhere in the back end they've decided that to make this kind of request or to request these items from the schema, you need to have this role or whatever. That your session token probably doesn't contain that role. I'm just guessing, but that sounds like that was the issue.
Yeah.
I can see more questions brewing. Also, we can talk after this. Don't worry. Yeah. I'll answer all your questions. Anybody who didn't know what GraphQL was before, do you kind of get what it is now?
Yes.
A little bit. Yeah. Some head nodding. Okay. Cool. Let me demystify it for you after this talk. Feel free to ask me any questions. Okay. Last question. Then.
Yeah. Last question.
Yeah. Actually, I've got lots of time, but I want to. Yeah.
I don't know if you can just touch a little bit about subscription.
Subscriptions. Okay. Subscriptions look like regular queries. Actually, I think there might be an example of one. I show here the query type. Yeah, there's one subscription, audits. So let me see if I can. Very carefully. Okay, so if you look at the query, and actually, okay, so this little tab here, doing this upside down. This tab here is part of GraphQL Raider. Maybe I should build something like this to make it easy, just have it in my app. But it's GraphQL Raider that it takes that like stupid-looking JSON with all the white space characters in it and turns it into what the backend will see as the query. So if you look, it looks like a regular query or mutation, right? Except it starts with the word subscription. And so just like that, it takes input. So it's fuzzable in the same way as all the other ones. The only thing that's special about it is that it's the purpose of a subscription. It's not always used. That's why I didn't get into it too much. But the purpose of a subscription is to have like if you want to have like a chat bot on your website. Anything that uses WebSockets, where you want to where you want to have some real-time interaction, you subscribe to a model, and you give it some input to say, you know, like here what is this paste? Oh, we're subscribing to paste. Okay. I actually don't know what this does on the DBGA, on the damn vulnerable GraphQL application. But it looks like when a paste is made, you get notified about it. I don't know. But imagine a chatbot. It would work. It was basically saying like, I want to subscribe to a chatbot. You send that you send the subscription request, and then it like initiates a WebSocket thing. And I believe the WebSockets also use GraphQL, but I haven't dug into that too much. I think it also depends on how you set it up. Yeah. Any other questions? No? Yes? Okay. You guys have been great. Thank you. Use it. Please use it. And